I came across a video of some college students being interviewed and asked, what was the Civil War and who won it?
Hmm.
They didn't know what the Civil War was. This was
Wow.
2014 college students, and it was so stunning to me. It was so sobering, and I thought, I could write historical fiction because you can use historical fiction. You can encase a lot of history in
Mhm.
fiction.
Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks to, where our guest today is Nancy Horan, and we're going to be talking about the House of Lincoln. Years ago, I read Nancy's book, Loving Frank, as I'm betting many of you other people did as well. I toured a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright's homes. I was completely obsessed, and I was completely immersed in her writing. That was a Book Reporter Bets On selection, and this book is one of those books, The House of Lincoln, that I kept going back to read over these last couple of days and really being excited about getting back to the book because the writing is so well done, but also the characters and what she's sharing about this time in history is so poignant and has so many reflections on today as well. So welcome, Nancy. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's begin with you telling us about the House of Lincoln instead of me trying to describe it to our readers.
Yeah. Well, the House of Lincoln is uh, set in Springfield, Illinois, where I grew up, where I was born and raised, and it covers 5 decades. It's not that long, I promise you. It's like 350 some pages, but it feels, big when you say 5 decades. But it covers the period from 1851 to 1909, and it's as much about the people around Abraham Lincoln
Mhm.
as it is about Lincoln himself. I wanted to explore how the people of that town nurtured a man who was country lawyer, ill-dressed, kind of just not smooth in his manners,
Mhm.
and how they nurtured him in a way that he became the president of the United States and is now considered one of the greatest. Often he's the top of the list in terms of best presidents. So I wanted to explore that town. And I decided to use the viewpoints of 3 different people from 3 families, and those families intertwined. And one was an immigrant family, one was an African American free family in Springfield, and another was Mary Lincoln and her husband and 3 kids.
Right.
So that was really the initial concept for it, and it remained that way. Lincoln lived in Springfield for 27 years, at longest he was ever anywhere. So the House of Lincoln refers to this house that he and Mary had at 8th and Jackson in Springfield, and it also refers to the White House, but there's this other part of it. Lincoln used to put notes to himself inside his hat, that tall hat.
Yes.
And I kind of felt like that was also a roof over his head, that what was going on inside that brain was also the House of Lincoln.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I love the part where he's walking out the door and he sticks a couple of letters inside his hat as he's walking out the door because
Get it?
he was a man who was constantly on the move,
Yeah.
constantly looking what is going on here and trying to understand, but also having his own point of view at the same time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would see ideas and then go here, or they go there, or they go this way or that way. And he was just on this line of this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. And I'm going to
Right.
do everything I can to stay there.
Yeah. He he hated slavery. He saw it early on in as a young man, when he did a boat trip down the Mississippi, and he saw it in New Orleans, and he was horrified by it. The thing was that he was also a real believer in the Constitution, and even dearer to him was the Declaration of Independence. So when he and that was commonly viewed as protecting slavery, those two, well, in particular, the Constitution.
Mhm.
So he was troubled by he didn't know how to solve slavery. I mean, that was the problem. He certainly hated it, and he had to find ways to attack it that would work. And when something didn't work, he was open-minded enough to listen to other people and to try to find a new kind of solution. So I actually observed Abraham Lincoln evolve over the whole period that is covered in the book, and he was evolving, and well, there's this other whole part of it, which is that in the Midwest, there was a lot of racism in the Midwest, and he knew his electorate. He knew where they were stuck, and he had been stuck too. I mean, he grew up in an environment where racial discrimination and racial prejudice was alive and well, sadly. So he could recognize it, he knew it, and he also had to fight against that in himself, I think, and he evolved, and he kept evolving, and he was by the end, and people criticized him for moving slowly. Abolitionists criticized him, and he didn't see a way to move fast. He said, I will not go any farther than the people are ready to go. He understood that it wouldn't work unless he pulled people along. And he did that. He pulled people along.
Yeah, he saw the problem, but saw this was not the right time to do what you need to do. You need to bring people with you, and you need to have a coalition behind you. And you have people that understand why you're saying what you're saying. And it's very difficult to be that measured, because people often see, I have to get to here. And we've seen that through history so many times. We've got to get here. We've got to get there now. And you're not bringing enough people along with you in order to help that decision get made.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that was the case for him. And so, but he would take these leaps. So when he did the Emancipation Proclamation, there was a real reaction against that from people who had supported him, because it was shifting the meaning of what the war's purpose was. Initially it was the Union, to preserve the Union, and the Union was sacred in the North, as slavery. I am now referring to something John Meacham said, and he said, the great historian, I don't know, I love John Meacham, but Meacham also said slavery was sacred in the South. And so, the idea of people fighting to preserve the Union was something people could get on board with. I think it was always tied to slavery, of course. And so when the Emancipation Proclamation occurred, he took some real pushback from people. But then what happened was it allowed Black soldiers to fight in the war. They proved themselves to be valiant, willing to lay down their lives. And it changed attitudes of soldiers around them, and it changed attitudes of people. So that was a case where, and by the end of his life, I think Lincoln was moving much faster. He really was. He was really thinking about the 13th and 14th Amendments, and he had already worked on Reconstruction. He was thinking far ahead, and then he lost his life. So.
And you always often think, if he hadn't, what would have happened from here? What would have happened to us as a country? How could we have moved ahead in so many different ways if he had lived? And look, same question about John Kennedy, the same question about so many, Robert F. Kennedy, all of these people who have been killed along the way. I mean, I also had said to my husband, how many people did we lose in World War II that might have cured cancer or might have done something really, really, really big? How many people did we lose during the AIDS epidemic that could have done something that really changed the world? And you go back to Lincoln, and you're like, what if that didn't happen? Because he had so many people behind him at that point that saw we were moving in the right direction. What would have happened?
Yeah.
So what inspired you to write The House of Lincoln? Was this a story because you grew up in Springfield, you always had in the back of your head?
No, I didn't have it in the back of my head, but I started to think about it a lot. Well, I was thinking about Lincoln, yeah, about I started in 2014 on
Mhm.
research, and I had finished Under the Wide and Starry Sky. I had finished the book tour, and I thought, okay, what am I really interested in? 2014 was an interesting year. A lot was going on. Black Lives Matter was a year into its existence.
Mhm.
There was a lot of talk about the polarization in the United States, and there was talk about the possibility of a civil war in this country because of the polarization, which I found really disturbing.
Mhm.
And I wanted to look at what the real civil war looked like, the buildup to it. And then while I was, beginning to read, I came across a video of some college students being interviewed and asked, what was the Civil War and who won it?
Hmm.
They didn't know what the Civil War was. This was
Wow.
2014 college students, and it was so stunning to me. It was so sobering, and I thought, I could write historical fiction because you can use historical fiction. You can encase a lot of history in
Mhm.
fiction.
Mhm.
And I also just wanted to know these people better and explore these people through fiction, just through my own exploration. So that's what started me. That's what got me going. And I have to confess that once I get going, I just dive in and I'm there
I
then.
saw the syllabus at the back of what you'd read, and you're like, these are the books that I've read, these are the things. And I was like, okay, she was really vested in this topic for a very long time.
I
And,
was, but also, oh, I'm sorry.
but I was also figuring maybe you were cooking dinner over the fireplace, like, oh,
Oh,
let's
you
go do this.
know it. Well, not over the fireplace, but you know, my poor husband, who is so great and such a support to me, but I mean, the poor guy has lived with Frank Lloyd Wright and Mama. He's lived with Robert Louis Stevenson and his gun-toting American wife. And honestly, he may feel like, you know, Lincoln and Mary have overstayed their visit because they've been with us a long time.
It's a
And,
long 9 years.
he's my sounding board.
Right.
Stevenson called his wife his critic on the hearth because she was just there and she was going to talk things through with him. And my husband, Kevin, has done that for me.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I think this is a good idea. I think this is a good idea. What do you think? Or let's talk about what Lincoln said yesterday.
Yeah,
Oh,
continually. Yeah.
continue. Let's go have this. But they're interesting conversations because there are people in history we do want to study. You realize somebody could study Lincoln as a course curriculum for a semester and learn so much and make it applicable to what's going on today. I mean, we had a little chat before we started, and I'm just into changing curriculum in schools so much to make it more applicable to where people are in their lives right now and
Yeah.
where we want people to be doing critical thinking, which I think has been somewhat absent because we've been teaching to a test, or we've been teaching to, you need to go to college, so you need to know this. And the love of learning has somehow been put on the sideline while
Yeah.
all this, you must, and I don't know. I'm just finding it very, very interesting because I see that there are a lot of people that just don't know about certain topics, like what did happen, what happened in this state. And there are a few things we're going to share during this interview, which I didn't even know about, what was going on during those times.
Yeah.
And you want to really get immersed and see what's going on, including the people like William Donegan, who took huge risks to bring others to freedom. And we've heard about these people through the years, but their
Yeah.
courage knew no bounds, and they tried inventive ways to move people. I like the one that would dress him up as a woman, put him on the corner and said, "I'm deaf and dumb," so that they could like move them during the night. And I
Mhm.
find myself so admiring these
Me too.
people who took such huge risks. And I got the feeling you felt the same way as you were writing about them, as these were heroes of where they were taking a risk. They were doing something that they knew they could be, really badly hurt or encumbered as, for trying to do, or they also might not get these people to their destination, but they were there and trying to do it.
Yeah. the Donegan family was so interesting to me. I should explain that, okay, there are 3 points of view, as I mentioned.
Mhm.
And I'll talk about the Portuguese immigrant girl in a minute. She's the primary
Yeah.
point of view, but William Donegan, actually, it was Spencer Donegan, his brother, who is the point of view character in this.
Mhm.
The Donegan family came to Illinois from Kentucky, and the mother must have been a remarkable woman
Right.
because her children, well, she had been apparently born to a free mother who was white. And the way that the state of being free or enslaved worked was if you came through a line that was free, it was the maternal line. And so Leanna Donegan was free and her children were free. I don't know what exactly that looked like in Kentucky in the 1840s, but undoubtedly they probably came to a state where they felt more freedom was available to them in the 1840s. What happened was Illinois in 1853 really beefed up their Black laws, and they became the most restrictive,
Hmm.
oppressive Black laws in the North. Northern
Mhm.
states had these laws.
Mhm.
In fact, when Illinois became a state in 1818, within 3 months, they created Black laws that required African Americans to register with the state, and you had to pay when you moved into Illinois. You had to pay $1,000 bond, post $1,000 bond, and you had to acquire freedom papers so that you could prove that you were free. Well, in 1853, they made everything much more intense, and you couldn't gather in groups. Uh, uh, if you were illegally there, you couldn't stay more than 10 days in Illinois. And if you did, then you were liable to be arrested by the sheriff and you would be in the sheriff's custody if you couldn't pay the $50 fee. And then you had to work it off. You would be auctioned off, your labor would be auctioned off to someone who was willing to pay for the debt you owed. And it was a kind of slavery.
Mhm.
So uh, that happened after they had moved to Illinois. But in any case, they were a remarkable family. William Donegan, yes, we know about William because he was Lincoln's shoemaker.
Mhm.
And he also, people didn't know it for a long time, but he gave an interview, and it was an anonymous interview to a publication in 1898 or something. And in recent history, around 2006, a Springfield, Illinois librarian figured out that that anonymous storyteller was William Donegan. And
Wow.
he described what it was like to move a very talkative teenage girl through Springfield to this 2-day adventure of running from slave catchers. And he said that during the time I was an Underground Railroad conductor, I had many people hidden away in the garret of my house.
Mhm.
Well, this librarian figured out it was William Donegan just by, where he said he lived and the name of his neighbor and so forth. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. That is so, so interesting. And then I looked at Spencer Donegan, and there was much less material about Spencer Donegan, but he had a different approach to fighting these laws and working for freedom. And what he did was he was part of the colored convention movement. This was something Frederick Douglass, the great leader and orator, had really gotten involved in earlier. And Illinois had its first state meeting in 1853. And that was when the Black laws were really beefed up, as I said. So they had a meeting, and Spencer was there. And he was part of the group that wrote the words as a result of the meeting about how they felt about the whole thing and what they wanted. They didn't want to pay taxes for schools their children could not attend. They, they wanted more freedoms, and they certainly wanted to get rid of the idea of colonization, for example, which Frederick Douglass was deeply against. Well, Frederick Douglass did attend that meeting also. And so reading the words, I realized, okay, I also knew Spencer was the person who started the first AME church in Springfield. He was a spiritual man. And later, much later in life, he lived in a nearby town to Springfield, and he was the first person to be impaneled as a juror, a Black man to be impaneled as a juror. He was highly respected, and the newspaper described him as highly respected. So I thought Spencer's gentle observations would be the best way to represent that point of view. And I think always when I'm writing historical fiction, I look at the forces bearing down on people. And if you think of Loving Frank, the forces that were bearing down on them, divorce laws and that sort of thing, the whole social climate. And I think in all our lives, we've had, certainly COVID counts as a big force bearing down on us. But when I was young, the Vietnam War, so many things besides our familial, problems or whatever, it's that big force bearing down on them. Well, for the Donegans, it was race, absolutely, and they fought it all the way.
Right. And you think about dedicating your whole life, not part of your life, but your whole life, really sitting there saying, this is what I believe in, and this is something that I'm really going to fight for. And people move in and out of causes. They move in and out according to what strikes their fancy, what's popular at the time. But to really be a force and to sit there and say, this is something I'm going to believe in my whole life is a big dedication that you don't see happening from everyone. You see people dipping in and dipping out. Oh, it's too scary. Let me move out,
You are so right about that. Yeah.
It's like, it's a
There
popular
are
thing.
people
Yeah,
in
popular.
this book, yes. And there are people in this book who really are inspiring. It's a difficult topic to write about because it culminates in a race riot. I think in Springfield, they had a race riot in 1908, and two of the characters were alive at that point. And the primary narrator, Ana Ferreira, witnesses what's happening. And it's just a terrible repudiation of everything Lincoln stood for. And the town is just so heavily criticized. Of course, it was part of the whole wave of things going all across the country, these terrible, they're called race riots. They're really assaults and murders. But in any case, yeah, so I just I really felt like that was important to include, because I think we have to look at the bad stuff as well as the good stuff as we face our history.
Difficult things, and how did they happen, and how do we not repeat them? What do we do so that that doesn't happen again? You also portray Mary Todd Lincoln as a true helpmate to her husband here. And you picture this petite woman with this very tall man. She was kind of round. He was really real thin. And she played different roles as needed in his life. And she did different things. What did you most admire about her? Because I could feel your admiration for her coming through the page, because she had a really tough job in a lot of ways, because she was with this man and she was, carrying him along. But then, now they're in Washington. Now we've lost a child. Now this has happened. So many things were happening personally to both of them at the same time as she's trying to further his career.
Right. Well, I think that was very admirable that she furthered his career. And I don't know if he really would have gone as far as he did if he hadn't had Mary pushing him. But what I admired about Mary was she really loved him.
Mm-hmm.
She really loved him and admired him. You know, she's been criticized horribly
Mm-hmm.
by other authors, by people, by historians. Mary went in and out of spats of mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
and her own son had her committed late in her life because she was exhibiting erratic behavior, apparently. Um, Today, you'll hear explanations of Mary's behavior as possibly bipolar illness. Of course, they had no medications
Mm-hmm.
for that then. Um, some people think she had, you know, diabetes. I mean, you get all kinds of explanations about Mary's health. But the point is that she was documented as having behaved badly by yelling at her help and that sort of thing. But there's also, you know, not as well publicized, but her neighbor, when one of her neighbors fell ill after having a baby, Mary nursed her baby until the mother was able, because Mary had a child of her own. She was nursing so she could nurse this other baby. There was a kindliness, you know, the fact that she gives furniture to the Portuguese girl working for her,
Mm-hmm.
that's based on kindnesses that she did to people. So I really felt Mary struggled within herself with her own demons, as Lincoln did. He had, I think, probably both of them had big bouts of depression, and yet she loved him. And he when he became engaged to her, you know, there's this famous point where he breaks it off, and then he has kind of a mini nervous breakdown over the whole thing around the 1st of January, right after uh, they had been engaged for a while. And I just think that he had a great deal of feelings of responsibility
Mm-hmm.
and loyalty, and I think he married her for those reasons, but I think he also loved her. I mean, he bought the whole package, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was this he adored her in a lot of ways. This was like, but I love that the little, you know, the moments where she gets to Washington and she says, we're going to do a big party and we're going to do this. And we want everyone there, the common people, not just the, you know, the wealthy people in the town. We don't want just the people who are in Congress. We want people of the people. And we want us to be shown as a president of the people. And he's flipping out because she's spending all this money. And he's like,
Yes.
why are you doing this? And she's being known as a spendthrift or whatever. But I think she was seeing a larger issue of, if I could get these people to buy in right now on what we're doing, the payoff is going to be so much better later on by putting everybody together. And I felt that he wasn't seeing this. Of course, he was a guy and it was understanding how you're spending money to do something like this. But she was really seeing, this is what I'm trying to do, is pull all the people together. And I'm trying to do something like this. And was I right in feeling that she wanted
Yeah,
to be pulling them there?
well, she had a few things going when she was having that grand party. I think she was, first of all, she couldn't do anything right in terms of how she was viewed in Washington. It had been a Southern city, and Southerners viewed her as, you know, a turncoat because she was born in the South, and she had a Southern family that ultimately, you know, fought against the Union. A number of them did, and her loyalty to Lincoln was quite remarkable. She had to give up her connection to close family members in some cases. But with that party, she was she was criticized also by the um I guess you'd call them the hoity-toity people in Washington. She was criticized for being just a Western bumpkin, and
Mm.
she wasn't. She had been raised in a house where she had learned you know, manners and proper behavior, and she attended a girls' school. She knew everything that they knew about behaving properly in a social situation. But she wanted to put on something that would be remembered, and she was very careful not to invite the people she didn't like. So, you know, she wasn't being just gracious to everybody.
No.
She left out some names, but what was tragic about that was that, they had a son who was ill upstairs,
Yes, yes.
and suddenly the whole glory of it was really diminished by the fact that they had a sick child. And Mary's mental illness, I mean, just as a mother, I just felt like, how would I be if I ultimately lost 3 of my 4 children? I just think I would not be mentally well at all. Um, and Mary lost her
Yeah,
children one by one.
one by one. And then the one that was with her was the one that committed her later on. Because what was he seeing like through the years behind closed doors that no one else had been able to see? We don't know. We really, don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I had little tidbits I read, but, he destroyed a lot of records after, her death, but, yeah, I mean, I think she was exhibiting some odd behavior where she was living, but, she got out of that mental institution pretty well.
She did. She did a good job. I
Talked her
also
way out.
I also love that she gave Anna the fabric to get her dress made, and she says, "I
Yeah,
will. You will not be in Washington. I will make sure that your dress is made for your wedding, and go pick the fabric you want." And so there was a very big generosity side of her, generous, not generosity, generous part, side of her as
yeah,
well.
definitely.
But I found it interesting that Lincoln did not carry his home county in the election. I didn't know that, and
Yeah,
that there were
that's a
factoids
reflection.
that there were these factoids throughout the book that gave readers real perspective. Were there things on lists that you felt were important to include, like it needs to be there?
I felt that was important because that's how complicated the whole story was, and I think that he probably didn't carry his county because of what he represented, and I have to say, well, first of all, Illinois and Springfield is right in the middle of the state, and Illinois was and Springfield, uh, the population was a combination of political attitudes, and it was a microcosm of the whole United States in a way. There were Easterners, there were New Englanders who were definitely anti-slavery. There
Mhm.
were abolitionists in that crowd. There were religious groups like Quakers who were part of the Underground Railroad who participated in that in Illinois. There were also Southerners who came up from the close by southern states, Kentucky, Missouri, and they came probably north from southern Illinois to take advantage of the rich farmland there.
Mhm.
But they brought southern attitudes with them about slavery. And I think that one of the big uh, wake ups I had in this book, in doing the research, was understanding that even though I was raised in a northern state and in a town that that embraced and loved Abraham Lincoln and his thinking, uh, at the time it was a racist.
Mhm.
It was a racist state.
Mhm.
It was, I mean, I'm not the only person who said that. There's scholars who have been very open about that. That was a fact. And that was shocking to me to see how
Yeah.
deep the racism was. It was endemic. It was in the air. It was remarkable. So I think that's why he didn't carry his county.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
he was up against his own forces bearing down on him, and that was one of the things. He had chosen a viewpoint and a stance that was not popular, and one of the really extraordinary things was to read the um, basically the text of the debates that he had with Stephen Douglas, because I learned about the Lincoln Douglas debates when I was a kid in school. I had no idea of actually what was being said. So
Mhm.
I went back and read some of these things. And Stephen Douglas was a respected Northern Democratic senator who had a lot of irons in the fire. And he wanted to get a transatlantic train to pass through Chicago, to pass through his state and go to the Pacific. And in order to get a northern line, he made a lot of deals with Southerners, I think, with representatives in the South. And as a consequence, he took on, perhaps he always had it, but he agreed with the idea that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence was written by white European men for white Europeans. And then he went on to list all the inferior races. And I mean, it was everybody else in the world, you know. So that was shocking to me, that, and Lincoln really embraced the you know, all men are created equal, free to pursue happiness. Part of the Declaration of Independence, he loved that document, and he believed that. He believed it firmly. So that was probably one of the biggest shocks I had. And then, of course, I compared that language to the language that was in the Cornerstone speech that was given by the vice president of the Confederacy when they separated, when they seceded and they formed their own government. They were going to write a constitution. Alexander Stephens, the vice president, said, "We are creating a form of government that's never existed in the world before, and it's based on the idea that whites are superior to other people, to Black people." And that was, you know, that was shocking enough. But then to see that Douglass was echoing that was surprising to me. Ultimately, Douglass, once he lost, and he won the race, okay? So when he was saying that, there were people who agreed with him and who voted for him. So I think that Douglass eventually came around, but I kind of felt, and he supported Lincoln very much at the end. But I think that I think he had to sell his soul. He thought he had to sell his soul or something, because it was pretty shocking.
I always thought of Illinois being a northern state without question, that there was no, like, you know, they were not opposed to slavery. They were opposed to slavery. And it's very interesting as you read, you spend more time going, wait a second, that wasn't really what happened. There wasn't a line, and everyone above this line believed this, and everybody below the line believed that.
Right,
And
very
we're
much.
so much taught that way. We're so much taught that this is this and this is that. And it's sort of more black and white, literally, about, you know, what the world was. And it's not. It's not. They're very, you know, they're permutations. You know, and then threats to Lincoln's life and that of his family came with his role of running for president. So the role of power brings with them, everybody wants to take you down. Like, you're here, we want to be able to take you out. Needed bodyguards. Mary decides at this point she's never going to open the mail because she doesn't want to see what's in that mail. Life changes like that for them, because though they could feel it and see it before, it's very much up in front right now. And you portray this so well in a couple of paragraphs. And all of a sudden we see life changed. And they're much more in the spotlight than they were before, even when you were running as a candidate. I think it was something that you want to be sure readers noted, is how your life changes on a dime when this ends up happening. And am I right in that? Because I feel like those couple of paragraphs, it's like, boom, 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 here goes life. Life's on the line.
Exactly. I think that probably happens to everybody who takes that office. But with the Lincolns, it was such an explosive issue that even got him elected. The minute he was elected, they started getting death threats, and it would come in the mail, and horrible death threats. And they were all planning on taking a train together out to Washington, D.C. And it turned out that they dared not. He took a separate train. He didn't want her and their children to be endangered. And then they met up later. And then when he came to the East Coast, there were rumors of plots all over the place. And so he had to just quietly enter Washington, D.C. There were no bands playing. He entered D.C. quietly, and then there were, you know, the inauguration, and here's a resonance for you. there was going to be an electoral vote count because he had won the presidency through electoral votes. And there were threats that there would be an attempt to overturn the government during the counting of the electoral votes. Does that sound familiar to you?
Familiar, right?
Yeah. And so Lincoln engaged the head of the army, Winfield Scott, General Winfield Scott, to really fill Washington, D.C. with soldiers who were on the alert for any kind of plots that might be developing. And Winfield Scott had been a war hero in 1812. Well, this was, 1860. And apparently he couldn't even sit on a horse anymore, but he was a great strategist. And so what he did was he just filled the streets with soldiers, and he put them under the platform where Lincoln was supposed to be inaugurated, because that was a threat that they would blow up the stage. And when he was asked, he said, if anybody tries to overturn this government, I will strap him to a cannon and blast him out of the Capitol building.
Yeah.
He was just this guy, who was so dramatic, but he was competent. He had fair warning too, that, weeks of threats. So in any case,
it's all possible. So then the war came, and Illinois quickly filled their quota of sending 6,000 to war. I never knew there was just a quota like that, and we're going to get our people off. And that happens really quickly. And people then rallied to do what they could do to help. And was there anything that surprised you in your research about the way these people mobilized and came together? And I'm going to be doing bandages. I'm going to be doing, we heard these stories during World War II, but during this Civil War, which was, ripping the nation apart, we weren't as a country going someplace. It was happening right on our own land. Were you surprised at wow, this is what people did?
I was moved by it, but I don't know if I was surprised by it. I think, first of all, people thought that war would last about 3 months. And so there was great enthusiasm the young men wanted to get in it before it was over with. They were really, signing up quickly. They met their quota very fast, and the women went into gear too. And I was happy to have Ana Ferreira, and I'd love to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to talk about her.
Portuguese also. She was a character who was representative of the women in that town who went to work, and they did. Excuse me. They went to the Capitol building, and room was set aside for them, and they would scrape linens to get bandages. I thought that was pretty interesting, and just to get that softness, that soft fabric, in order to create bandages. And they did so much. And of course, no battles were fought on Illinois ground, but so many people lost their children, lost their fathers, lost their husbands. It was heartbreaking, and they were very active in the war.
Well, I confess I did not know there were immigrants from Madeira, Portugal, who made their way to the Midwest during the time of this book. This was like a huge revelation to me. Was that something
too
you discovered? Okay, so you discovered this during research, because one of the people that immigrated were really on the coasts. It was, people coming in from the Far East were here. People came in from Europe. Our family came from Italy. They were on the East Coast. They didn't migrate west. Remember when Kristen Hanna said there were some Italians in Texas at one point, or Oklahoma? I was like, really? I didn't see people going that far. I saw the same, more clannish. So tell us about what you found about these people that come from Portugal.
Well, I was interested in the 1850s because that was the buildup. And, when I started this project, I thought, what was going on to build up to a civil war? And because I was thinking, well, people now are talking about a civil war, So in any case, I really started exploring the 1850s. Well, in 1849, a group of Portuguese immigrants arrived in Springfield and an adjoining town, Jacksonville, Illinois. But they came because they were religious exiles. They were Portuguese. They were from the island of Madeira, and they were Presbyterians. And apparently, a Scottish minister had converted a lot of Madeiran people, thousands, to the faith of the Presbyterian Church. And there was Madeira and was a Catholic, part of a Catholic country. And it became very uncomfortable for these people to remain in Madeira. They were harassed, they were attacked. So they escaped, the Scottish minister did, as well as many of his converts, and they got on a ship that was headed to Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
So many of these people had a stepping stone. If they came on to the US, they went someplace else first. And this group of refugees went to Trinidad and worked in sugarcane fields in a variety of jobs, but really found the climate to be different from where they were from and found it very hard. So they appealed to the United States, and a Protestant women's organization in New York City found work for them with a hemp farm in the middle of Illinois. Well, it turned out that job offer for hundreds of people was rescinded, but they came anyway. And Springfield opened its arms, and so did Jacksonville, Illinois. They opened their arms to these refugees, hundreds of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to sort of show what it was like to be an immigrant in Illinois in the 1850s. And the family of the Ferreiras is completely invented, yet their history and their background is very much based on the real history. And when I write, I just should say that when I write about real people, which I've always done, I really want to respect them because they may be dead, but I feel like they deserve the benefit of the doubt. I want to just be very careful how I handle their stories.
Yeah.
So in any case, the Ferreiras are invented. The father arrives and he eventually becomes a painter.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this is based on these little blurbs I would find in some, 19th century description of citizens in Illinois. And I found a man who became quite a painter of interior murals and that sort of thing, who was Portuguese. And I took all these stories and sort of then concocted this family. The mother is the one, well, the children, Ana, there are 3 children. Ana is 9 when she arrives in 1849. She's 13 when she goes to work for the Lincolns as a Saturday girl, and then eventually stays on with them. Her brother is the youngest. Her older sister, Beatrice, is also a part of the family, but nobody adapts as well at first as Ana. She learns the language and she runs errands for the people in the neighborhood. It's called Little Madeira or Madeira. That was the neighborhood in Springfield and in Jacksonville as well. So she kind of gets around. She knows who the storekeepers are and that sort of thing. And she befriends an African-American girl named Cal, who, that story I told you about the discovery of that anonymous account, and it was really about William. Well, in that account, he talks about a girl named Hal, Hal, who helps him in one of the escapes. And I thought, okay, how interesting. There was a young girl who was helping a neighbor man assist in
Mhm.
an escape of a teenage girl through town. So Hal became Cal in the story, and then I just invented Cal. But these girls, their friendship continues all the way through the book through
Mhm.
5 decades. And it was a rich opportunity to explore those personalities.
And it gets a little bit fraught, like towards the end. It's a little bit fraught, and get into that too, because I think it's really interesting of the way the book ends, because there's this waiting again of what is going to happen. And
Yeah.
as the answer really been found, have we really solved the question that started at the beginning of the book? Like, did we solve it? Not
Yeah,
really.
that
Yeah.
is such a good, I'm so glad that you saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we didn't get there.
I felt it wasn't solved. You
Mm.
know, we have close friendships. When you have a friendship where you're separated by many miles and you don't stay in close touch, sometimes you can lose each other, but other times you stay, marginally connected. And these women manage to do that over time. But there are other things besides their own history. It's
Mhm.
the history of what happens in the country that comes between them in a way. It's the history of how things didn't change and didn't get better the way they wanted them to. And that's partly there. It's like, are they going to connect again?
I don't know. But I also feel too, and I might have been just interpreting this reading the book, Cal has a daughter. Anna does not have children.
Right.
Cal is also hearing from her daughter how her daughter feels about other relationships, how her daughter feels about these issues that are out there in the world right now. And when she sees her mother with a white woman, what does she feel? And what does she impart then to her mother? And her mother, because of the mother-daughter, bond and relationship, what is that doing that will affect her relationship with someone else? And it was just something that I was thinking about, because the way the daughter is having the conversation at that moment, I feel like we're in a book club discussion right now. It's so funny. We're in this book club discussion. You know, see what she felt? But I think that was really interesting, because she had an outside force besides what was going on in the world in her family. And what was her daughter going to say if she went to go up and meet with her? But
That's
look,
so
mom, what's
interesting.
going on? You
That's
know?
so interesting. It's I hadn't thought of it quite that way. So thank you.
Yeah.
But I also think that it part of that is that it's a new generation.
Mm-hmm.
New
Mm-hmm.
generation, and what have their experiences been?
Right.
You know, that daughter is growing up in a different world than a small town where it was possible for those two girls to be so close to each other.
Exactly.
What is their world like? And I there's a certain sadness about that, but I also think there's wonderful hope too
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in the characters in the book, including including Cal and how she sees the world. She has hope. She
Mm-hmm.
has hope. She has her own community, and it strengthens her. So I think there are some really positive and hopeful models in this. I mean, Frederick Douglass,
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass, he shows up, and I have to tell you how he showed up. Like, he did go. It's true that he did attend the Color Convention Movement meeting in Chicago when Spencer was there. But he also did tours all the time. He was an orator, and he made his living that way. And he would go across the country. He was the most photographed man in
Mm.
the 19th century.
Wow.
And you know what? He got around. He would have photographs done all the time, and he was doing it very purposefully, because it was a complete antidote to the cruel cartoons that might be in a newspaper. He was showing his dignity
Mm-hmm.
and his intelligence and his elegance. And but it was hard to find material on Spencer Donegan.
Mm-hmm.
But I found a little blurb that was about a little small thing in the newspaper from 1866 when Frederick Douglass had come to Springfield to talk. And there was this little blurb in the opposition newspaper to the Republican newspaper. It was the Democratic newspaper. It was sarcastic. And they said, is it true that Donegan the barber had a dinner party for Frederick Douglass and invited all his influential friends? What a feast that must have been, just sort of a sarcastic thing. Well, I have no idea if they had Frederick Douglass for dinner, but that was all I needed.
I can take off from there.
Yes, we're gonna have a dinner.
this little line, I was like, I liked after the riot in 1908, Anna thinks of a line that Alsop, who was her benefactress, had told her. Some people are willfully ignorant. They aren't stupid. They just simply choose to be oblivious. That way they aren't responsible for anything that goes wrong. And it's such a poignant line of, I'm just going to be oblivious. I'm just not going to say what's going on. So then when something goes wrong later on, I could say, oh, I just didn't know. I didn't know anything that was going on at that point. And I thought that was so interesting because a lot of times that's what people do. They just wash their hands and go, oh, I didn't know anything about it. That's just, I'll take a back seat. I don't have to be involved.
Yeah.
It's not like,
I think that was true then, and I think it's true now. I mean,
yes.
Human nature.
That's exactly. With her relationship, Anna, going back to Anna and Cal for a second, it was one where Anna still had privilege as the immigrant that Cal did not have because of the color of her skin. So they're fast friends. They're separated, then they're together. They can be friends to a point. At one point, she's told not to be friends with her, and then she ends up back into her life. And as time goes on, it's like they're close. They're not close. But I think that's also showing what was happening to people in a bigger scheme across the country of just playing it through with these two people. Of they want to be friends, but can they? Should they? Won't they? Why don't they? And all those still questions are coming up in their everyday lives. Of should we be hanging out with each other or not?
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. And that's probably true now.
Yeah. And the way that the slaves escaped up north reminds me of the migrants heading here today. People just want to have a better life. They're coming across the border. It's a completely kind of different situation, but they're clandestine means meant to get them here. Like people are doing all kinds of crazy things to try to get people here. And there's this parallel right now of, are we still equal? Are we still whatever? And it's something that we're still burning as a question. How many years later that we're still having these kinds of discussions?
Yeah, it's remarkable. I think there was a lot of fear mongering certainly on the part of Stephen Douglas,
right,
about massive migration of freed and enslaved people coming north, that scared people somehow. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lot of loose, bad talk back then. And I think it exists now,
Well, what are people going to come and what will they take from me? And if people's jobs were fraught and they weren't sure they were going to be able to keep them, then do I want somebody else coming to take my job? Do I want somebody else to not just better themselves, but what are they going to do to me and my family as time goes on? And it's also, there was also a lot of brutality from the war that we're bringing home. At one point, you were talking about sin eaters and how these stories handed down through the years. You saw a parallel between what was happening with the soldiers in the war. And how, can you take my sadness away from me? Can you take this badness away from me? And I saw that coming through again and again in the book. Can you make life better for me? How can you do it? So where did you get the idea for the sin eaters? And
I've lived with it for a long time.
Yeah.
I read about it and I thought, well, first of all, the sin eaters, that was an old religious tradition. I think it was like a folk tradition that died out. Probably, I think I read that the last sin eater maybe was doing that at the very beginning of the 20th century, but it was kind of a cultural thing you might see in Scotland or Ireland or Wales. But it was a situation where if a person was dying, I assumed it was if they hadn't ask for forgiveness for their sins if they hadn't confessed, perhaps. There were people who were called sin eaters, and they lived outside of town often. They were poor. They might have been alcoholics. They might have been just reviled for some reason or other, but they were brought to the bedside of the person who was dying or who had died. And there might be a piece of bread placed on the body of the deceased, and then the sin eater would eat that bread, and it would be a symbolic transferal of the sins of the dead person to the sin eater.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sin eater would be compensated with food and drink, or perhaps money, and that kind of thing. And that concept has stuck with me for a long time. And I thought for a while I would just write a book of short stories about sin eaters, because it has seemed to me in looking at wars that old men send young men to war, and
Mm-hmm.
the young men are the sin eaters, for the sins of the elders who have not been cautious enough. They have not taken care in the long run. And I certainly saw that the soldiers could be viewed that way, as sin eaters, for the shameful behavior of slave owners and the slave owning aristocracy. Really, there were many Southerners who didn't want to go into that war, and it was regarded as it was a rich man's war that poor people fought.
Mm-hmm.
And in any case, Sin Eater lives with me. It's just,
Yes, it really was with you. I also thought that, when Owen arrives back, Anna encourages him to talk about what he went through in the war. And she felt that helped when she had been in the infirmary with the soldiers. And she says, I think you owe it to me. And in saying that, I think that she also wanted to understand war. She wanted to understand what he had gone through, as well as help their relationship. Am I onto something there?
yeah. I think that I read about PTSD people who and apparently it's quite common that men and women who have been in battle and have experienced trauma and horror don't want to talk about it. And don't talk about it. And I've heard so many stories about this, like from friends whose fathers, one friend of mine, his father was a prisoner of war in Germany, and he didn't talk about it until the very end of his life. He had been on 25 missions and had been shot down and imprisoned. And my uncle was one of those guys who really didn't want to talk about the ugly things he had seen. So I think that she wanted him to have the release because she felt that might open something in him, and he could then be able to not drown his grief with alcohol, which he was doing in the book. So
yeah, he could maybe move forward. I also think it seems very fitting that Springfield got a Carnegie Library. And at that time, Carnegie says, I'm not going to put my name on it. It's a Lincoln Library. And it's
right.
like, I could never do that in this town. I could never do this in this town,
Yeah. It's
So,
great.
was the House of Lincoln always the title? Did you always know that?
It was not. I mean, I didn't have a title.
Okay.
This was the title that was created by my publisher. And I like it. I do like it. This is not an upstairs downstairs book, by the way. I mean, it's you do get gossip from Ana, who observes stuff and witnesses stuff, and she does talk about it. She takes the news home and talks to her family about, oh, you won't believe what I just saw. But at the same time, it really goes into multiple households, and it's not only in the Lincoln's house, but there are years in the White House, very definitely.
Well, it's also, I felt like the House of Lincoln was the country at that point.
Absolutely.
And I felt that was really, when I saw the House of Lincoln, I think it's like, okay, this is his country at this point. And the hat is perfect. Was this the first jacket that you saw? Because it just feels like it's a perfect jacket cover.
No, it wasn't the first one, but we got there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got there, and that made me happy.
And now, do you listen to audiobooks? Is that something that you enjoy
Yeah,
doing?
I
Or
do. Uh-huh.
so Sarah Wellborn's doing the audio. Was that your selection? Did they give you a couple of
I
voices?
had nothing to do with that either.
Really? Okay.
Do you know her?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I did get an audio clip that we're going to add on the end of the podcast of
Oh,
this.
great.
The listeners will be able to get an idea to, like, what the audio sounds like. But yeah,
I
I'm
can't
always
wait.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Because audio has become such a big part of what's going on right now in publishing. And it used to be, I used to tease authors that it was like your rights to Finland. It didn't really matter. And now all of a sudden it's like a really big deal. So obviously you've been working on this since 2014. You're getting ready to go on tour for the House of Lincoln, get out there and talk to people. So what's next? We have to ask. Do you have something that you're ruminating, or Carol, come on, I just did this.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to think of doing another book at this point, but I have to tell you that all my friends, I've told them stories, just funny stories about my aunts and, just the funny family I came from. And they said, "Oh, you're right about that." And I would only do it for my kids. I think I'm at a point now where I want to write. I don't know. Maybe I would write another book. I can't really say I won't write another book, but it takes such a long time writing books.
It is, and the
But I
research.
got way deep in this one, I have to admit.
Well, I have to admit, because when I was looking at all the books you read at the back, I mean, these books are not books that you read in 20 minutes. And then you have to come up with a point of view of how you're going to do the book. Was it always through the eyes of these three characters? Or did you start down one path and say, wait, can't tell it this way. Need to go in a couple of different directions?
Yeah. And I did do that. And I've done it before with Loving Frank. I had three narrators and threw away 400 pages and started over with one narrator, Mema. I couldn't figure out what I was going to do when her story suddenly ends, but I figured it out, and that's why I did one narrator. This one, I really wanted to show what the whole society was like, what the town was like, who the people were there. And again, the forces bearing down on everybody. It wasn't so simple a picture as what I had imagined. And so I was really, and speaking of audio, audio is great for research too. I listen to books on tape, doing research when I'm walking. I listened to David Blight's lectures at Yale on the Civil War walking. I made my way through that. I listened to, if you ever want to listen to a fascinating series of lectures, it's the Wreath Lectures, Hilary Mantel. Try that.
Okay.
I just loved hearing her talk about history. And there's a great quote I could actually sort of give to you if I can find it here. It's a wonderful quote on her part, and she talks about the connection between the past and the present. I see, we may.
And boy, we do see it. Here we go again, more than once.
Yeah, I'm not finding it. You're going to have to edit that out.
Okay, don't worry about it.
But
looking for it was a good thing. Looking was a good thing, and even just knowing there's a quote out there, someone will find it, they'll put it in the comments,
Basically, she says that history is a process. It's not a little box full of facts, and that there is a constant dialogue going on, a conversation between the past and the present.
That's
and
really
I
good.
Just love that. I thought that is so true. So true.
What a great line to end on. That is perfect, because it really is true, and it's true. And I think we thought more about that would be extremely helpful. It'd be extremely helpful. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. It was so good to see you. It's been a long time. I think we met way back at the beginning with Loving Frank.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to see you too. And keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Really enjoyed it. Yeah.
And to our readers, look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.